The morning was quiet when Olivia Bennett boarded a flight from Texas to New York, unaware that her life was about to change forever. It was Easter break, and with the hospital quiet and her nursing schedule finally giving her a breather, she decided to spend a week with her parents. Her mother had been begging her to come home for months. Her father had simply sent her a text, "Skies are clear, come fly home." The airport bustled with life, families headed off on spring vacations, children clutching chocolate bunnies, and laughter drifting through the terminals like music. Olivia, dressed in her nursing school hoodie and jeans, walked quietly to gate 17, clutching her worn leather backpack. Inside were two things that defined her: medical textbooks and a thick stack of aviation manuals that few would expect from a nurse in training. As Flight 6 to 8 lifted off and the Texas landscape grew smaller beneath her, Olivia leaned into the window, eyes tracing the clouds. A soft smile played on her lips as a memory surfaced, vivid and warm. She was 10 again, in the small garage behind their old house. Her father, Captain William Bennett, retired now but once the most respected pilot in the region, was hooking up an old flight simulator. Left rudder, steady now, level out. Good. See, you've got the hands for it, he said with pride, his calloused hand resting gently on hers. Never underestimate what you've learned. Someday it might matter. Back in the present, flight attendants moved down the aisles, passengers chatted casually, and the soft rumble of the engines remained steady beneath their feet. Some were reading, some dozing off. It all felt so ordinary. But at 30,000 feet above the clouds, fate was writing a new chapter for Olivia Benetton that would take her from a quiet nursing student to a name the world would never forget. Not a single soul on Flight 6 to 8 could sense the storm that was silently approaching. At 30,000 feet above the patchwork of clouds drifting silently over the eastern states, Flight 628 cruised as if nothing in the world could disturb its serenity. The seatbelt sign was off, drinks clinked gently on trays, and a soft hum from the engines created a strange, comforting rhythm. Somewhere near the middle of the plane, a baby cooed. A couple in business class whispered over champagne flutes, and the man in 14C snored gently against the window. Olivia sat in 18A, a quiet space near the wing, her tray table down, her attention drifting between the latest chapter of her nursing review book and a half-played aviation simulation video paused on her tablet. The mix of medicine and flight in her world always drew puzzled glances, but she never bothered explaining. Both had been her life since childhood, both still were. She had just taken a sip of apple juice when it started. At first, it was subtly small jolt. A few heads turned, brows lifted, but no one panicked. Then came a second, stronger shake. The overhead bins rattled, a murmur rose across the cabin. The plane dropped slightly, then quickly steadied. People looked at one another with quiet concern. Turbulence, they assumed. Nothing more. Then came the third jolt, violent and sudden. The aircraft shuddered with a sound like tearing metal. A shriek echoed from the back. Oxygen masks dropped like ghostly pendulums from the ceiling. Trays flew, drinks spilled, and books crashed to the floor. The cabin plunged into chaos. Olivia's heart thudded. She grabbed the armrests, her eyes darting to the emergency pamphlet she had long ago memorized. She looked up, masks everywhere. A flight attendant screamed as she stumbled down the aisle, clutching the wall, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. Olivia felt the plane tilt slightly. Something was wrong, more than turbulence. Much more. In the cockpit, hidden from the passengers, Captain Gregory Parker gripped his chest with a grunt. His vision blurred. The familiar hum of the instruments around him began to sound far away, as if underwater. The co-pilot, James Reynolds, leaned toward him. "Captain, you okay?" But the captain didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the yoke, then slipped. His body slumped sideways, falling hard against the window with a dull thud. Reynolds lunged toward him but fumbled, knocking the radio headset aside. He reached for the controls, hands shaking. His voice, thick with fear, crackled through the comms. "Mayday, Ma," before he just staggered, gasping, his face paling. Within seconds, he collapsed forward, arms limp across the controls. In the cabin, the intercom went dead static, then silence. That silent sight was loud, heavier than any sound. People began to shout, someone cried, children whimpered. A man stood up yelling, "What's happening?" But no one answered. The plane had begun to drift, not dive, but it was clear that no one was flying it. The flight attendants were frozen, white-faced and wide-eyed. One ran for the cockpit but found the door locked. Olivia sat motionless for a second. Then she unbuckled her seat belt. Something inside her, something instinctual, something old and trained, took over. She moved down the aisle as if in a dream. Two others stood as she moved. One was a middle-aged woman with a Red Cross badge pinned to her hoodie. The other, a tall man in a navy blazer, spoke up first. "I'm a doctor," he called out. "Let me through." The woman followed. "Paramedic here." The three of them rushed to the front, navigating the panicked sea of passengers. Olivia was quiet, focused. She didn't say a word. Not yet. The doctor and paramedic pounded on the cockpit door. No response. "Get this open," the doctor shouted to a flight attendant, who was already fumbling with the emergency override key. The door clicked. It opened, and there they were, both pilots, out cold. The cabin crew gasped. The paramedic moved in fast, checking pulses. The doctor pulled out a stethoscope from her carry-on and began examining the captain's chest. "Heart attack," she muttered. "Massive. He's not responsive." "What about him?" Olivia asked, pointing to the co-pilot. The paramedic knelt beside him. "Faint pulse. He's breathing. Could be oxygen deprivation or shock." He looked up. "But neither of them is flying this plane." A beat passed, then another. Panic spread. From the rear of the aircraft came the sound of someone hyperventilating. A woman began screaming. Someone else vomited into his sick bag. A man ran toward the cockpit, only to be blocked by a flight attendant shouting, "Stay back." The plane shuddered again, dipping slightly. Olivia looked around. No one knew what to do. No one could help. Her eyes scanned the cockpit, blinking instruments, the open skies ahead, the vast panel of controls that looked so familiar, yet so terrifying. Her father's voice came back, calm and steady. "You know what every dial means. You've landed 100 flights, Liv, even if it was just a game. Only this wasn't a game." She looked at the paramedic, the doctor, the pilot slumped over, the horror in the flight attendant's face. Then Olivia stepped forward. "I know how to fly." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, calm, like she had rehearsed it 1,000 times before. Everyone turned to her. The doctor blinked. "You what?" "I've trained on flight simulators since I was a kid," she said, her words quick but even. "My dad's a retired pilot. He taught me everything: instruments, procedures, landings. I've done this for years." The paramedic looked skeptical. "That's not the same as flying an actual plane." "I know, but it's what we've got." The doctor hesitated. The paramedic looked back at the co-pilot, still unconscious. "You've flown a commercial aircraft simulator?" the flight attendant asked, breathless. "Hundreds of hours." There was a pause, a collective silence, a suspended breath. Then slowly, the paramedic stepped aside. "Okay," he said. "Do it." Olivia took the captain's seat. Her hands hovered above the controls. She took a deep breath, reached for the headset, and slipped it on. "This is Flight 628, she spoke into the mic. "We have an emergency. Both pilots are unconscious. I repeat, both pilots are unconscious. I am a civilian with simulator experience, requesting immediate assistance." Static. Then a crackling voice broke through. "Flight 628, this is air traffic control." "Say again, did you say both pilots are down?" "Yes," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the fear clawing inside her. "Both are unconscious. There's a doctor attending them. I'm the only one available to fly the aircraft." A pause, then another voice, calmer, Oldera flight operations manager, perhaps. "Copy that, 628. Who am I speaking with?" "Olivia Bennett." "Olivia, do you have access to the controls?" "I do." "Okay, Olivia, we're going to help you. You're not alone. First, confirm your current altitude and heading." And just like that, the world shifted. A 21-year-old nurse in training, trained by her father in a garage full of old simulators, was now piloting a commercial aircraft through the skies of America. Behind her, hundreds of passengers sat in stunned silence. Some sobbed quietly, Others held hands, parents rocked children. No one spoke, but they all looked forward, toward the cockpit, toward the girl with fire in her eyes and steady hands. Olivia didn't know if she'd succeed, but she knew she had to try. Because up here at 30,000 feet, fate had stopped waiting for heroes. The low hum of the engines was the only sound in the cockpit, a rhythm that felt far too calm for the chaos outside. Olivia's knuckles were white against the yoke, her hands trembling ever so slightly. The plane, once soaring steadily through the sky, now felt like a bird struggling to stay aloft. The altitude was droppingly at first, then faster. She could hear the faint crackling of the radio as air traffic control's voice came through. Crisp and urgent. Flight 628, you're descending too rapidly. Adjust the trim. Descend to 10,000 feet and report back. Olivia's breath caught in her chest, her heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. I've got this, she whispered, repeating the words she had so often heard her father say during their years of flight simulations. She pushed aside the fear gnawing at her and focused. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate. Her hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the trim, pulling back on the yoke to stabilize the descent. She tapped the flaps into place, the aircraft responding with a slight, reassuring hum. The steady pace she had worked so hard to maintain was slipping away. Her heart pounded as the warning alarms in the cockpit screamed at her. Altitude, the machine demanded. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to ignore the panic that was beginning to set in. Another voice crackled over the comms, a calm but authoritative tone. Olivia, listen carefully. We are rerouting you to the nearest airport. Prepare for an emergency landing. She nodded, even though no one could see her, adjusting the vectors as air traffic control dictated. The wind was picking up outside the cockpit window. The once clear skies had darkened, thick clouds swirling ominously. The plane lurched slightly to the left, the wings buffeted by the fierce gusts. The rain came next fast, unforgiving, pelting against the glass with the force of tiny hammers. Stay steady. Trust the instruments, she murmured to herself. The words a mantra her father had said every time he'd seen her hesitate at the controls. She repeated them again now, even as she felt the weight of hundreds of lives pressing on her shoulders. She wasn't just piloting the aircraft anymore. She was holding together the fragile thread of hope for everyone on board. The cockpit was alive with a flurry of activity, each click of a button, each dial twist, every brief exchange of information with air traffic control. But still, it was Olivia who was doing the work. She guided the plane through the descent, the massive aircraft responding to her every input as if it too knew it had to trust her. She aligned the approach to the airport, calculated the vectors, measured every inch of the descent against the runway's position. Her mind was a blur of numbers and coordinates, her hands moving almost mechanically as she made minor corrections. The closer they got to the ground, the more intense the storm became. Lightning flashed, illuminating the turbulent clouds in violent white bursts. The plane's wings groaned against the force of the wind, and the air pressure made the very walls feel like they were closing in. Hang in there, Olivia. You've got this, came the reassuring voice of air traffic control. The runway appeared suddenly a glowing ribbon of lights in the middle of the storm. Olivia's heart thudded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She adjusted the yoke gently, guiding the nose of the plane down just enough to meet the runway with precision. The moment stretched on agonizingly long, and the plane seemed to hang in midair, caught between the storm and the ground. She eased the yoke back and felt the tires touch the tarmac with a soft thud, followed by the deafening squeal of the brakes as the plane slowed. The cabin jolted as the plane came to a halt. The plane was still. Silence. The storm outside raged, but within the confines of the aircraft, there was nothing but the heavy collective exhale of relief. Then the applause came. It started hesitantly, a few claps, unsure, and then it spread like wildfire through the cabin. Passengers stood, tears in their eyes, hands clapping, some in disbelief, others overcome by emotion. Some were crying, some were laughing. Olivia sat still for a moment, breathless, her body finally registering the intensity of what had just happened. As the applause grew louder, a soft sob escaped her lips. She allowed herself that one moment of release. The tension of the past are flooding out of her all at once. The overwhelming weight of responsibility, the lives she had just saved, began to sink in. "Thank you," someone whispered from the back of the plane, and Olivia looked up, meeting the eyes of a young mother, her small child clutching her leg. Olivia smiled faintly, nodding in acknowledgement. It was then that Olivia realized everything had changed. She had flown the plane. She had landed it. And in doing so, she had become more than a nurse in training, more than a daughter of a retired pilot. She had become a hero not just in her own eyes, but in the eyes of every person on board. And for just a moment, as the storm continued to rage outside, Olivia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Rain fell in soft patterns over the tarmac, draping the world in a silver veil as flashing rescue lights streaked across the wet ground. Like scattered jewels, the cabin door creaked open, and cool night air flooded into the plane, mingling with the heavy scent of adrenaline, fear, and survival. Emergency responders stormed aboard with professional urgency, lifting the unconscious pilots from the cockpit and wheeling them down the mobile staircase. On stretchers, paramedics shouted vitals, their voices cutting through the storm like sharp knives. But for Olivia Bennett, everything had become muffled, like the world had dropped a thick curtain between her and the moment she just survived. She stood near the flight deck, barely gripping the frame of the cockpit door, her fingers trembling and slick with sweat. Her heart, which had remained calm and mechanical through the crisis, now thudded with erratic urgency as the noise around her swelled. One passenger reached for her hand, whispering, "You saved us." But Olivia didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat was dry, her body was exhausted. Her mind had yet to catch up with the magnitude of what she had just done. Outside the aircraft, the buzz of disbelief had begun. Reporters were already gathering at the terminal, scrambling over barricades with cameras raised like sharks drawn to blood in the water. Airport security attempted to maintain a perimeter, but whispers spread faster than any line of defense. The plane had landed safely not by a pilot, but by a 21-year-old nursing student. One by one, passengers began descending the stairs. Some sobbed, others looked shell-shocked, disheveled, but grateful beyond words. A few paused, eyes scanning the exit behind them, silently waiting for Olivia. Their eyes held reverence not just for her actions, but for the stillness in which she'd carried them through the sky and safely back to Earth. Olivia finally stepped out onto the stairs. Flashes exploded around her. Camera lights burst in rapid succession, capturing the wet strands of her hair stuck to her cheek, the smudge of oil on her sleeve, the dazed look in her eyes. She didn't blink. Her legs moved automatically down the stairs, into the arms of airport personnel who didn't know what to say to her. One woman, a ground official, tried to smile. "You're incredibly brave." Olivia simply nodded. A flood of microphones came next, voices shouting over each other, questions bouncing like ricochets. "Olivia, did you really fly the plane? How did you know what to do? Are you trained? Where did you learn how? How are you feeling?" But the girl at the center of the storm didn't speak. She kept walking, her steps soft, slow, as if she feared the moment she stopped moving, she'd shatter. A security officer led her through a side door, away from the crowd. Her phone buzzed non-stop in her jacket pocket, text messages, news alerts, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She silenced it with a shaking hand. Inside the airport, the chaos followed her. TV screens overhead displayed headlines in bold type. Nursing student lands passenger jet. Young hero saves flight 628. News anchors appeared with furrowed brows and excited voices, playing grainy footage of the landing, passengers applauding, and her ghostly figure walking into view. Some clips had already been looped. The story was everywhere. People pointed as she passed. Some applauded, others simply stared. She was taken to a quiet room, a holding area with a couch and vending machines humming in the background. Someone offered her water. Another asked if she needed medical attention. She said no to both, her lips pressed together in a pale line, her eyes unfocused. Watching a drip of rain streak down the window, her mind replayed it all again and again. The co-pilot slumping forward, the pilot's last breath, the stunned silence when she announced she could fly, the yoke in her hands, the way the instruments responded like old friends, the voice of air traffic control guiding her. But it was her hands doing the work. She had done it. Hours passed. Eventually, someone from the airline arrived to speak with her, asking questions gently. Trying not to overwhelm, she answered in short phrases. Yes, she had flight simulator experience. No, she was not a licensed pilot. Yes, her father used to fly. No, she didn't feel like a hero. They told her she was free to go and that they'd arrange transportation. But she just shook her head. "I want to go home," she whispered. And so she did. A quiet car ride. No words from the driver, only glances in the rearview mirror. The city outside was beginning to wake, bathed in the dim glow of pre-dawn street lights. But Olivia wasn't awake, and not truly. Her mind was suspended between reality and disbelief. Every passing moment like a film she wasn't sure she'd starred in. Her apartment was just as she left it and made bed, half-eaten granola bar on the counter. Notes from a nursing assignment spread across the table. It was as if the world hadn't changed at all, except it had. She dropped her bag inside the door and stood still, her eyes glazed. Slowly, she walked to her bed, sat down, and pulled her knees to her chest. Her breath hitched, her hands gripped the blanket tightly, the only thing tethering her to the ground. Then the tears came, not loud or dramatic, but slow and relentless, like the rain still trickling down her window. She didn't cry out of fear or grief, but because the weight of survival was crashing down upon her. She had held the lives of hundreds in her hands, and now those hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her phone continued to buzz. It had become a living thing, vibrating against her nightstand like a heartbeat. She turned it over and finally glanced at the screen. Hundreds of messages, emails, missed calls, mentions. Her name was trending. Videos of the landing had millions of views. Photos of her face wide-eyed, smudged, brave had been turned into digital posters. One post read, "We don't deserve Olivia Bennett." Another, "I want to be like her when I grow up." Celebrities had begun to share the story. One aviation page called her the future of flight. Another branded her an icon of instinct and courage. Olivia threw the phone under her pillow. She lay down, fully clothed, head against the cold pillowcase, eyes wide open. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but inside her apartment, time stood still. She stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of her life now. She had boarded a plane to go see her parents for Easter. That was all. She was off for the week. She hadn't even packed much. It was supposed to be a quiet visit, but fate had other plans, and fate, it seemed, had just put her on the world stage. When she finally drifted into sleep, it was not restful. Her dreams came in fragments, blinked dashboards, screaming passengers. Her father's voice from childhood saying, "Trust the instruments," and the feeling of weightlessness as the wheels kissed the runway. She slept through the morning, into the afternoon, and woke to knocking on her door. She didn't answer. She didn't want to. The knock stopped eventually. Later that evening, a crisp white envelope slid beneath the door. It bore no postage stamp, just a golden seal embossed at the top. She sat up slowly, crossing the room barefoot, picking it up like it might be fragile. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a single letter typed, formal, but unmistakable. The President of the United States was inviting her to Washington, D.C. Not a media tour, not an interview, an invitation to the White House to speak, to be honored, to be seen. Olivia stared at the words, her name in the header, the signature at the bottom. She sat down, and for the first time since the landing, she let herself smile. Just barely a flicker of light after the storm. Because somewhere deep inside her, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. A sharp knock at dawn. Outside her apartment stands a black SUV and a man in a suit. "Olivia Bennett," he asks. She nods, barely awake. He hands her a sleek envelope. Inside, embossed in gold, are the words, "The President of the United States requests your presence." Her hands tremble. In the Oval Office, the President smiles and extends a hand. "You showed courage under impossible pressure," he says. "America needs to hear your story." Olivia nods, eyes wide. Her life has taken flight. The sun hung high in the sky above Washington, D.C., casting golden light over the south lawn of the White House, where an audience had gathered in quiet awe. Rows of white chairs lined the lush grass, filled with government officials, aviation experts, survivors of Flight 628, and press from around the world. The flags fluttered gently in the breeze while flower arrangements framed the small stage. At the center, an elegant platform where history was about to be honored. Olivia Bennet stood just beyond the curtain, her breath calm but her heart fluttering like the wings of a hummingbird. Dressed in a simple pale blue suit and white blouse, her nursing school pin still clipped to her collar, she looked nothing like the headlines that had branded her America's angel in the sky. But her iced host soft, determined eyes carried the weight of all she had lived through and all that still lay ahead. The president stepped to the microphone, greeted by a wave of applause. His voice boomed through the speakers, steady and warm. Today, we recognize not just courage in the face of crisis, but a rare kind of strength, quiet, unshakable kind that doesn't wait to be asked. Olivia Bennet didn't land that plane for glory or fame. She did it because it was the right thing to do, because she believed she could, and because hundreds of lives depended on someone like her stepping forward. He turned toward Olivia, lifting a small velvet box. For your extraordinary bravery, intelligence, and selfless action, it is my honor to present you with the Presidential Medal of Honor for Civilian Service. Olivia stepped into the sunlight, and the crowd rose. Applause echoed across the lawn, rolling like waves against the White House walls. Flashbulbs burst, the wind toyed gently with a strand of her hair. But as the medal was placed around her neck, gleaming gold and blue against her chest, Olivia didn't look at the cameras. She looked upward, past the flags, past the clouds, into the endless sky. She approached the podium with a grace that didn't come from confidence, but from clarity. She cleared her throat once, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak not with flair, but with authenticity. My name is Olivia Bennet. I'm 21 years old. I'm a nursing student from Texas, and I never thought I'd be standing here. A ripple of laughter and applause broke gently across the crowd. On Easter weekend, I boarded a plane from Texas bound for New York, unaware of what was about to unfold. I packed lightsome clothes, my nursing books, and a few aviation manuals I kept for fun. You see, before I ever wanted to be a nurse, I was obsessed with planes. My dad, a retired pilot, used to teach me with flight simulator games. It was our thing. I didn't know it then, but every time I played, I was preparing for something bigger than either of us could imagine. She paused, her eyes flicking to the survivors sitting in the front row, their faces wet with tears, hands gripping each other. When that cockpit door flew open and we all realized our pilots were down, I remembered everything my father taught me, everything I learned from the games, from the manuals, from years of just watching and wondering. I remembered his voice, trust the instruments, live, and I did. The crowd was still, hanging on every word. I didn't save that plane alone. There was a doctor and a paramedic who fought to keep the pilots alive. There were passengers who stayed calm. There were air traffic controllers who believed in me. But in that moment, when I sat in that seat, I had to believe in myself. She looked down briefly, overcome, then found her voice again. What I did up there, eyes, it was flying, but more than that. It was about honoring every piece of my past that had led me there, every hour I spent studying, training, dreaming. It was never wasted. Passion and preparation saved us, and I think deep down, we all have something inside us that's just waiting to be called forward. Silence, then thunderous applause. The speech would go viral within hours, quoted by journalists and shared on screens across the globe. But in that moment, Olivia stepped down quietly, her face glowing not with pride, but with peace. Later that afternoon, she stood alone in the rose garden, the medal still warm against her chest. The ceremony had ended, most of the guests had gone, the reporters had moved on. But Olivia stayed, letting the moment settle into her bones like sunlight soaking into soil. She didn't yet know what would come next, but she felt it in the air change was humming around her, soft but undeniable. The president himself returned, walking at a thoughtful pace. He handed her a leather envelope with a golden clasp and said, "Open this when you're ready. Consider it a thank you from the people of this country." She opened it after he left, fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a personal letter on presidential stationery and a donation certificate for $10 million. In her name and not a loan, not an award, a gift with no strings attached. Her hands went cold, her knees almost gave way. $10 million. Her future, once framed by student loans and long shifts, had cracked wide open in a heartbeat. That evening, back in her hotel room, she sat by the window, watching the city lights blink across the Potomac River. She turned her phone back on, finally, and was met with an avalanche of message offers from aviation academies, letters from medical organizations wanting her to speak at conferences, book publishers, talk shows, scholarships from schools she'd only dreamed of attending. One private message came from a young girl in Montana. "I want to be like you when I grow up. Not because you're famous, but because you were brave and kind. Thank you for showing me what girls can do." Olivia read it twice, then again. She didn't reprint it yet, but she saved it. The next morning, she visited a quiet museum near the Capitol Air and Space Museum. She wandered through the exhibits with childlike wonder, stopping before the nose of a retired Boeing 747. She smiled faintly. Somewhere in her heart, that same whisper returned. Let's see where this goes. Over the next few weeks, the whirlwind didn't stop. She flew home for a short time, welcomed at the airport by strangers holding signs and children waving tiny American flags. She was given keys to her city. Her nursing school established a scholarship in her name. But through it all, Olivia remained the same girl who once sat in her bedroom playing flight simulators with her. Dead humble, curious, quietly brave. She used part of her donation to start a foundation for young women in STEM, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. She called it Skybound Futures. Her mission was simple: to empower those who, like her, had dreams hidden beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to rise. Some days, she still studied nursing. Some days, she trained in aviation. Some days, she didn't do either, just walked, breathed, watched the sky, and allowed herself to feel everything she'd carried. And as time passed, she didn't let the fame change her. She let it guide her. Everywhere she went, people wanted to know what she planned to do next. Pilot or nurse, they'd ask. She'd just smile, because the truth was, she didn't need to choose. She already knew she would do both. She would follow every road her heart opened. Because once you've fallen from the sky and landed on your feet, there's nothing left to fear. One evening, months later, she stood at the edge of a runway in silence. A private jet sat before her, donated by a company inspired by her story, fitted for both emergency medical use and flight education. It bore a name across its side in sleek blue lettering, the Olivia Bennett one. She stepped toward it, her heart quiet but alive. She climbed into the cockpit. She ran her hands over the controls, and for the first time since that Easter morning flight, she whispered again, "Let's see where this goes." And then, with calm hands and a clear sky ahead, she took off into a future entirely her own.